What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Before I get started on the video, just want to let everybody know I will be live tonight on Bad Dog Sports for Talking Giants. This is kind of the only night we were able to get it to go. I will be live streaming the Knicks game. I think they start at 7 or 7:30, so that's going to go a little bit later. We're going to start the show probably around 10:15, 10:20, being that it was the only day that we could do the show this week. So definitely come on by for Talking Giants, as we'll talk about the end of the season. 4 days to go, guys. 4 days to go. It's almost over, and then we're going to have a ton of content in the offseason. And one of the things that we're going to talk about for sure throughout the offseason is which players the New York Giants should potentially look to bring back from this roster. Of course, the Giants have a number of pending free agents for this football team and not a lot of cap space to begin with. I've gone over a lot of the things that the Giants could do to try to create some cap space for the new GM who may come in, and we'll see what he inevitably decides to do. You also have to factor in if they bring in a GM from the outside, he's got no ties to any of the players on this team, which obviously highly increases the probability that he's not going to look to bring back a lot of these players, especially when you factor in the cap situation. But I do think there's at least one player that the New York Giants should at least consider if the price is right. But we'll jump into all the free agents for the New York Giants this upcoming year and me kind of talk about what I think some of their markets may be. But that's just me throwing darts at a board. Also, really wanted to touch on the story of the day that came out, about Patrick Graham. Patrick Graham came out today and he was asked about whether or not he'd be open to taking a head coaching position. Now, last year, if you remember, Patrick Graham was given an opportunity to interview for the New York Jets job. He didn't even show up. He went as far to say that the New York Giants were his dream job in terms of being the defensive coordinator and the assistant head coach to Joe Judge. We know that Judge and Graham have a great relationship, and a lot of people have kind of hinted at on Twitter that would Patrick Graham potentially take the head coaching job for the New York Giants if they were to move on from Joe Judge. I really don't see it happening, especially due to the fact that Graham has been the assistant head coach here for the last 2 years. So if you're going to move on from Judge, I think you would look to go in a completely different direction. And like I said, if you're bringing in an outside general manager, there's no ties there to Patrick Graham. Now, I think a lot of us like Patrick Graham for the most part. We liked him more last year. Last year, this defense definitely overachieved. We ranked near top 10 in both yards and points against. For a defense that came in with very limited expectations. He did a fantastic job. Now, you could certainly argue that we went up against some backup quarterbacks, but with the lack of help from the offense, he did a damn good job. This year, the offense has done him no favors. As a matter of fact, the offense over the last 6 games or so, or however many games Daniel Jones has missed, has been even worse than it was last year. So he hasn't gotten any favors. Also, he's had some bad luck in the injury department. Blake Martinez being out for the year, Dory Jackson being out now for an extended period of time certainly hasn't helped him, along with Jabril Peppers. But he's still done a decent job. Now, have there been some games where the defense was horrible? Yeah. First 2 weeks of the season, the defense was abysmal. I would say the Kansas City Chiefs game was his best performance in terms of calling plays, and the way that they were able to take Travis Kelce out of that game. And the bend but don't break approach really worked well in that game. Overall, I'd say it's been a satisfactory year for Graham, but it's why I don't think, regardless of what Graham had to say here, that he'd probably get a head coaching job. Now, he may get interviews. He's a smart guy, and maybe he blows somebody away from within the interview. But what he's done this year, I don't think warrants him getting a head coaching position over a lot of the other guys that may be out there. But we'll have to wait and see how the offseason plays out. If they keep Judge and Graham does not get a head coaching job, being all his, how strong he's connected to Joe Judge, I would think Graham would be back. If they fire Judge, I would think Graham would go along with him. But this coming out from Ralph Vacchiano. Giants defensive coordinator Patrick Graham, who turned down an interview for the Jets head coach job last year, is open to interviews this season. And there's a lot of ways you could read into this. This is what he had to say. The idea is to one day be a head coach. If someone wants to talk to me, I'm sure I'll consider it. I would be flattered to have an opportunity. And I think that's a very honest answer. And to be honest with you, I was surprised when last year he said the defensive coordinator for the New York Giants was his dream job. Now, I know he's got a very strong connection to Joe Judge, as he later went on to say here, but like he said, most coaches, they want to have an opportunity to run their own program, and I'm sure that Patrick Graham has some different ideas than that of a guy like Joe Judge. This coming out from Zach Rosenblatt. Patrick Graham on Joe Judge. I'm here because of Joe. I trust Joe's vision, and I'm sure that's true. He basically made a lateral move jumping from Flores to Judge. He was a defensive coordinator with the Dolphins. I know that he wasn't calling all the plays, and it seems like Flores is hard to work with. But he came over here to take basically the same position with a improved title in terms of assistant head coach. Him and Joe seem to have a very good relationship. It's why I doubt Graham would even, well, he probably would take the job. Who are we kidding if they offered it? But I really don't see that happening. Now, one way that you could read into this, Patrick Graham is kind of coming out before the end of the year. Does that mean that Joe Judge may be on shaky ground if Graham is saying that he'd be open to taking head coaching jobs? Rob Sale, we all know at this point, is probably not going to be back with the team, and he's kind of talked poorly about some members on the offensive line. We'll get our answers in 4 or 5 days. But as far as Graham goes, I'd be happy if Patrick Graham was back as the defensive coordinator. I don't know if that would happen if we were to move on from Joe Judge. If Judge stays and Graham doesn't get a head coaching job, well, that'd be great. He'd be back as the DC. The one bit of good news that would come out of this, if he did get a head coaching opportunity outside of the organization, the New York Giants, based on the new league rules, would actually be compensated with a third-round comp pick due to the fact that he's a minority candidate. They instituted a new rule 2 years ago where if a minority on your coaching staff gets hired to be a head coach or general manager with another organization, the team that loses that person gets a third-round compensation pick. So if they were to lose Graham, which I don't think they will, I don't think he'll get a head coaching position somewhere else because he's actually regressed this year in terms of his overall performance as a defensive coordinator. The team's 23rd as opposed to 10 last year. But if he did, the Giants at least would get a pick for it. Next thing I wanted to jump into was the pending free agents for the New York Giants going into the 2022 offseason. And this is not all of them, it's most of them. They have 20, and let me start off by saying, due to the fact that we have a limited budget, and due to the fact you're going to more than likely be bringing in a new GM with no attachments to any of these players, the majority of these guys will not be back next year for the Giants. You could cross off Nate Solder, you could probably cross off Billy Price, you could cross off Levine Toilolo, you could cross off Mike Glennon, Nate Ebner, Danny Shelton, Reggie Ragland, Elijah Penny. I think the 4 impactful players that you want to talk about here that the New York Giants potentially will lose going into next year are Lorenzo Carter, Will Hernandez, Evan Ingram, and Jabril Peppers. And let's talk about them. We'll start with Jabril Peppers. Jabril Peppers, obviously, we acquired in the Odell Beckham trade, and at times has looked good with the Giants. He's had an injury problem, and the fact that, for me, it comes down to his market. And I don't know what his market's going to be, but if he gets anywhere near, even pretty top-tier money at the safety position, the New York Giants just quite frankly can't afford to bring him back. Also, the fact that they drafted Xavier McKinney 2 years ago and signed Logan Ryan, and they're going to be committed to Ryan going into next year, leads me to believe that more than likely Jabril Peppers will not be back with the New York Giants. The only way I could even see it happening, people have asked me in the past, is if he took a hometown discount for this football team in a prove-it year. But regardless, long-term, I don't see Peppers being with the New York Giants. Next guy we'll talk about is Will Hernandez. Will Hernandez, the former second-round guard for the Giants, going into his 4th year this year. We had high hopes. He came in, he looked like he lost some weight, looked relatively impressive in the preseason, has been very underwhelming. He's got a PFF grade of about 56. Each week he looks like he's completely lost out there. Maybe you could say that he switched positions and he's not playing next to the best right tackle in the league, obviously, Nate Solder for the majority of the year. So that's certainly not helping him. But Will Hernandez, I think, will be gone. Again, GM did not draft this guy, the guy that's going to be replacing Dave Gettleman. And Will Hernandez has been very underwhelming with the Giants. And in free agency, you have teams that are desperate. They're going to see a 25, 26, 27-year-old offensive lineman with some potential and look to acquire him on their roster. We've seen it happen countless times with this football team. I think the Giants will replace Hernandez, more than likely in free agency, with a stopgap option and potentially also draft an interior offensive lineman in this year's draft class, but I don't see the Giants giving a multi-year commitment to a guy like Will Hernandez, and I think some team out there more than likely will. Next guy we'll talk about is Evan Ingram. Ingram actually has not been that bad this year. Now, he hasn't been targeted a whole lot. He's only got about 400 yards receiving, but he's kind of cut out the drops for the most part. You haven't really seen him cost us too many games, something that we became all too familiar with last year. But he just hasn't been used as much. Evan Ingram is a former first-round pick and undeniably is a mismatch nightmare. The problem has always been with Ingram that he's had drop problems. He's had injury problems. But for the most part this year, I can't really complain as a Giants fan. That being said, would I re-sign him? No. Again, unless it's a Jabril Peppers situation where you could bring this guy back on a contract that I think is well below his market value, which I don't think is going to happen. I think you will find a team that will see the potential in a guy like Evan Ingram and be willing to give him a lot more money than some fans may think. I don't know if he's going to break records, but I think he'll get a decent contract. Now, the good news that comes out of all of this, due to the fact that the Giants are not going to have much money to acquire players to begin with, if they lose some of these players, they are going to be compensated. You will get comp picks for them. Ingram will more than likely be a 4th or 5th round comp pick. I would assume Hernandez may be in the same boat. Peppers, who knows? I don't know what his market will be. Of course, the Giants did get a 3rd round compensation pick for Landon Collins a couple of years ago when he set a record-breaking contract for a safety. But I don't really see any one of those 3 players coming back, and the only way I could see it is if it was on a short-term deal. The one player that is interesting to me that I think could go either way is actually Lorenzo Carter. And I'm surprised that I'm saying that because Lorenzo Carter was kind of out of all of our minds leading up until the final 3, 4, 5 weeks of this season. And suddenly he's turned on the Jets. And a lot of people may say, well, he's done this before. You think back to his rookie year. I remember he had a game, somewhat near the end of the season against the 49ers where he looked great. And he's shown spurts. And that's been what Lorenzo Carter's been in his entire career in the NFL. And this year, for the first 9, 10 games, he was relatively non-existent. The last 3 games, he's been a beast. He had 7 of his 15 pressures on the year in one game against the Dallas Cowboys. And he's got 4 sacks in the last 3 contests. He's had a sack in each of the last 3. So he's looked really good. He's still young. He has potential. He's a guy under the right circumstances I think the Giants should consider. Here's his career stats. He's got 4 sacks this year. Last year had the Achilles injury. Only had 1 sack, 4.5 the year before that, and 4 the year before that. But if you look at just his last 3 games, like I was saying, all 4 of his sacks have come from within the last 3 games. He also has the majority of his pressures and the quarterback hits within the last 3 games. He basically did nothing before that. The reason being, you could at least argue, is because he was coming off an Achilles tear, and he probably wasn't near himself until these last 3 or 4 games or so, where he's looked like a different player, and that is without getting a huge snap count. I looked at it. The snap count's been around 65 to 70% over the last 3 weeks, and he has definitely jumped off the page and has shown to be an impact player for this football team. Now, as far as Carter goes, I don't think I'd be open to give him a big-time multi-year deal. If you could get him on a cost-effective deal, though, for 2 or 3 years, maybe you're intrigued. I would definitely be open to signing Carter for a 1-year deal because we know right now as Giants fans, we're really thin at that edge rusher position to begin with. And if Carter is truly turning the corner and you get a good defensive coordinator in here, if Patrick Graham leaves or if Graham stays, maybe he is a guy that we could get a ton out of, a guy that we've been really excited about his first 4 years in the league that has never really blossomed. Last year, obviously, though, was cut down to injuries. And this, over the last 3 weeks, has been the Carter that we were hoping we would get when we drafted him coming out of Georgia in the 3rd round in 2018. Is it false hope? I'm not sure. It's kind of in the middle for me. I don't know if it's a sign of things to come or if it's a fluke and a player that's really incentivized to look really good down the home stretch. It's why I would not give him a long-term commitment, but I'd definitely be open to signing him on a 1 or 2 year contract if the money made sense. Again, we're going to be under a very tight budget. The good news is, if he does break the bank and there's a team out there that sees the raw physical talent and how good he looked over the last month of the season and is willing to give him a big contract, like I said earlier with the other players, the Giants would probably get a 4th round compensation pick for a player like Lorenzo Carter. But we're very thin at the edge rusher position. I mean, you think about it, outside of Azeez Ojulari, we don't have much there. Of course, the Giants could draft an edge rusher early in this year's draft, but Carter's a guy I would not mind bringing back under the right circumstances. But I kind of just wanted to go over all the free agents that the New York Giants are going to have to consider bringing back at year's end and talk about Patrick Graham. I'd love to have Graham back as the defensive coordinator. My guess is he will not be a head coach in the NFL next year. That's just my guess. And as long as Joe Judge comes back, I'd expect Graham to be back in Big Blue next year as well. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.